I have my contact information also at the end of the presentation as well. Oh, trying to advance. So as far as my background, I'm a science librarian at Scottsdale Community College in Arizona, and I've been gardening for about 10 years, and that's really where my experience comes from. I'm not a botanist or horticulturist, but I've been learning by letting the plants teach me over about 10 years. I started with a garden that was pretty much bare dirt and weeds about 10 years ago, and you can see it in this picture with one tree back here, well, actually 2 trees that I'd put in, and you can see about 8 years later, it's kind of behind, that tree is behind another tree now, it's kind of in the background here. And so I've been adding space to create habitat at home for wildlife with this garden. It has about 150 species, that's pretty large. I don't think, it's not necessary to have that amount of a species for a habitat at home, but I'm just really interested in it. So I've kind of really gone overboard, but I just wanted to give you my background as far as where I'm coming from, as far as my knowledge base is really working with the plants, on kind of a daily basis with gardening and enjoying them. And I'm also active in the Arizona Native Plant Society as well. And so there's kind of 3 segments to the presentation. The first one, I'm going to talk about why native seed and native plants are important and offer some various points to ponder, and habitat at home as well, and how seed libraries can help with these things. And then I'll talk about how the Maricopa Native Seed Library was implemented in the last year. It's new, it's come on in August of 2020. And then I'll talk about how you can do something similar by adding native plants into an existing seed library or starting a native seed library. So just to get us kind of all on the same page about what a native plant is, I wanted to provide some definitions and background here. Because sometimes this is something that is not necessarily agreed upon based on some various fine points. But if you look at the 2 definitions here, you could see the first one, a plant that is part of the balance of nature that has developed over hundreds or thousands of years in a particular region or ecosystem. And then the other one, with respect to a particular ecosystem, a species that, other than as a result of introduction, historically occurred or currently occurs in that ecosystem. So I think kind of the 2 big pieces there have to do with the plant has been in that location, in that region for a long period of time, has evolved in that region, and is this other idea of part of the balance of nature. These plants are part of food chains and food webs and interrelationships with all sorts of other organisms, from microorganisms to insects, birds, and everything else you could think of, just all the interconnections. So that's sort of kind of the general. Now, some people say, well, what do you mean by region? It could be small or it could be big. It could be, plants native to a particular park or county or, state, and you can get broader and broader. But sometimes, like, as far as making choices about native plants, it's deciding where am I going to limit my region to? Is it going to be a smaller or larger region? And then also another point that's important for the Americas is that for the most part, native plants are considered only those that were here prior to European contact, colonization, and settlement. So anything that was after that period would be considered an introduced plant and would not be considered to have those sort of interrelationships with other native species here. And the big point, and I think I've kind of hit it a few times here already, is that this idea of relationships between native plants and other native species, there's lots of mutually beneficial relationships and that have co-evolved over time. And so this is why native plants are so important, is because of these relationships, that they provide better cover or better nectar, or they have evolved with the pollinators that are here. They've evolved with the other wildlife here. And so those interrelationships are so important. And this is why sometimes you hear about cultivars. You'll see a lot for sale in the nursery. They may have like a Latin name and then something sort of whimsical in quotation marks, and that's the cultivar. That denotes that it's a cultivar. A cultivar is something, or nativar, they're calling them if they've been cultivated from native plants, are those that have been specifically manipulated by human beings for certain traits over time. And so that's in contrast to native plants that they call straight species that have not been altered. So having the unaltered native plants preserves those relationships. Cultivars don't necessarily, because they've been altered. So often they've been altered in ways that make them not as beneficial to wildlife. For example, some of the flowers, they've been altered that they don't produce nectar, or it's harder to access and things like that. So we're talking strictly about natives in this sense. Now, habitat at home is not a new idea, but it's gaining a lot of ground. And I think it's because we have some excellent writers like Doug Tallamy and others that are really promoting this concept. And so what we're seeing is more than ever, there are so many threats to our wildlands. Here in particular in the Southwest, of course, it's fire and drought and invasive species and development. Other areas might have other threats, such as maybe flooding. And then we have the threat multiplier of climate change on top of all that. And so the idea is that our wildlands are they're getting smaller, they're getting degraded, and they're fragmented. So the idea is what gardeners are doing in their yards, it matters more than ever before, because it used to be, really just based on the aesthetics for the gardener. What can the gardener look at and enjoy in their garden? But now it's becoming more and more important that what we grow, it influences everything that can live around us. And that's an idea from Doug Tallamy and some of his books. I'll talk more about that again. And so with habitat at home, we're talking about creating a habitat not just for humans, but for other organisms. And so pollinators can be a big piece of that. I've got a picture here of habitat at home where I've planted a certain type of prickly pear that's native to our area, and it's hosting a native bee that's nectaring and gathering pollen. So that's an example of habitat at home. The habitat is extended beyond the habit, it's not just for humans. Habitat at home can be small. It doesn't have to be a large space. It could be a small patch, a small wildflower patch. Doesn't have to be large. And I'll talk about this when I get into some of the benefits here, is that habitat at home is really good for you personally. It could be good for a lot of reasons, and your family. It's good for your community and for wildlife. So let's kind of explore some of these reasons a little bit. So I'm going to offer what I believe are 5 considerations about why native plants and habitat at home are important. And some of them may resonate with you more than others, but I think that they're good talking points, especially if you're thinking of adding native plants or starting a native seed library. These are things that you can use to help educate and raise awareness. So the most obvious one is ecological, and we've talked about that already a little bit. This idea that native plants are essential to any healthy ecosystem. And this idea of these relationships that have evolved over time. So there's lots of research that shows that native plants will support native wildlife better than non-natives. That doesn't mean there's not the occasional non-native that can provide good habitat value, but it just overwhelmingly, native plants overwhelmingly support native wildlife better than non-natives. And then native plants provide a lot of what's called free ecosystem services. Food, a lot of these plants are edible. They provide shade. They help purify water and regulate floods. So this is just some of the ecological benefits of native plants. Then we have economics. Having a native planting, no matter what part of the country or even the continent you're in, or really anywhere, I guess you could think even more broadly than that, native plants are adapted to the conditions in your area. So they require less inputs. They don't need as much water or maintenance, fertilizers, and pesticides compared to if you're growing a lawn or a non-native landscape. So that's a huge piece there as far as the individual families concerned, is the savings. And then also, and I have some examples here, the top example is an invasive species stinknet coming in and creating what I call a monostand. Almost all that's there is stinknet compared to a native Sonoran desert habitat. And the idea of tourism, a lot of regions have tourism that's based on the natural beauty and uniqueness of that area. And so by helping to grow habitat at home and controlling invasives around you and near you, you're allowing, you're helping tourism as well, and think about the economy of areas. So that's something that maybe isn't thought of as much, but I think it's in a consideration, especially for folks that are more, thinking about fiscal reasons. A lot of health reasons to have native plants. This idea about inputs, these plants don't require fertilizers. Pesticides are really not necessary. And that's going to add less toxins into the environment, both for humans and all the other wildlife that can be affected by toxins. So that's a benefit. Also, there's a lot of mental health and physical health benefits to having a living landscape at home, and probably even more so during a pandemic when folks are spending more time at home. So having a living landscape, there's so many benefits to that that have been documented, such as lowering of blood pressure, stress reduction, improving mood, and boosting the immune system, which we definitely need right now for sure. So that's another good argument about having native plants at home and a living landscape. So not just the native plants, but everything it brings in, that sort of maybe mini ecosystem in your yard and that living landscape. And then a lot of native plants have medicinal value. And so by conserving them, we can preserve the possibility of future medicines. Many of these plants, including the two I have on the slide here, are believed to have medicinal value, have traditionally had medicinal value, but haven't necessarily been brought into any sort of commercial, production for the medicinal value. And that's true for a lot of plants. So there's a lot out there that, we haven't taken advantage of yet. And now probably, one of the more philosophical reasons to consider a living landscape, a habitat at home, and native plants is the idea of just intrinsic value, that native plants have value in and of themselves beyond what they bring to us in terms of saving money or, the economy and things like that, but they have intrinsic value and they should be conserved. So conserving them at home is an important value. And then the idea of that no matter where you look in the world, and over time and place, spiritual traditions, they've had values, surrounding nature and surrounding the interconnectedness of all living beings. So having a habitat at home, a living landscape at home, is a way to honor those traditions. And then finally, having habitat at home is really a great place to engage in any type of spiritual practice because it's such a relaxing space. And now aesthetics. Native plants, there's so many different native plants. They have such great beauty and variety, color, interest, and they attract wildlife. So I think that's another thing to think about, as well as this idea of sense of place, which is that each region has its own palette of native plants that provide a sense of place. It's like when you see a saguaro, you know where you are. You know that you're in the Sonoran Desert. You can be nowhere else because it's the only place it's found. And so similarly in every habitat, whether it's prairie or more tropical habitat, it has a sense of place because of those plants. And there's so much talk in our popular culture about the idea that everywhere's looking the same with the same big box stores and strip malls, but with our native plants, we can retain a sense of place. So as far as seed libraries, being involved in native plant conservation, when I think of seed libraries, they're typically at brick and mortar libraries, public libraries, or academic libraries, sometimes other types of locations as well. But when I think of them, especially at typical, brick and mortar libraries, I think of that as an ideal avenue to increase the availability of native plants. And that's because these libraries are already accessible locations to the public. There's no barrier in terms of cost for patrons. So that's really good in terms of equity. Because seed libraries typically give away their seeds for free. And then all of these things I've talked about with plant conservation and all the benefits of native plants really aligns with library values related to access and equity, sustainability, and lifelong learning, because gardening is certainly a type of lifelong learning as well. So now I'll pause. That was the end of the first segment. So I'll pause and see if there's any questions before we move on.
Hi, Danielle. This is Lisa. Yes, there is a question and a comment that have come in so far. So first, a question from Lauren. She asks if you could please address climate change and changing ecosystems. Specifically, how do we adapt our plants to changing plant and animal ecosystems?
Ooh, yeah, that's a big question. You know, I'm not sure which direction to answer that in. I could probably, you know, go in a lot of directions with that. But I would say that, I'm trying to think, there's so many directions I could go with that. But one thing I would say is that when I selected the plants that I included in my seed library, they were all natives to this area, but I was looking specifically at those that are the most adapted to dry and hot conditions because I'm anticipating climate change and adaptation to climate change. And I believe those species have the best chance of continuing on. So that's maybe one way to think about it. Can you repeat the question again? I just want to make sure that I got the heart of it. I don't know if I did.
Yeah, sure. So please address climate change and changing ecosystems. How do we adapt our plants to changing plant and animal ecosystems? Maybe not necessarily adapt our plants, but to adapt our, you know, our offerings, you know, to be more in line with changing plant and animal systems.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that quite yet because I don't know that everything's shaping up to see exactly where we need to go with that. I mean, I can only really answer, I think, in my region because that's what I'm familiar with. But the other thing I'm really advocating for folks to do is to add more trees into their landscapes because we have such a problem with the heat island effect here, which is magnified by climate change. You know, the heat and the lack of any shade, I'm really advocating folks to get trees in. So maybe that, I can't really answer that for other regions as much, but here in particular, those are some things that I've been thinking about as far as we need to get more shade out in areas to be able to handle what's coming our way.
Okay, and then there's a comment and a question from Lily. First comment, encouraging the cultivation of medicinal plants also helps deter the overharvest of these plants in the wild. For example, Thailand is struggling with endemic medicinal plants being stripped out of their forests. And then a question, do you include native seeds from areas abutting your immediate ecosystems?
I have some plants that could be considered more transitional. There are some of the milkweeds and some of the shrubs in particular are at a slightly higher elevation or can be. And so I have added some of those, but I don't know if they'll do well in all spaces depending on the situations they're grown in.
Okay, and another question from Melissa. Do you use an app to help you identify native plants, for example, with your phone?
Yeah, I've used iNaturalist a lot, and there's a great botanist on there that volunteers and has helped me through a lot of difficult, you know, situations with plant ID because I'm not a botanist, and so trying to, you know, figure out what I'm looking at, especially when I'm out and about hiking, has been very, very helpful.
Okay, and I can put a link to iNaturalist in the chat in a moment.
Thank you.
And one last question, I'm sorry, no, another question came in, but this question, what materials or strategies do you use to communicate the importance of native seeds and plants to seed library visitors?
So there's an infographic I've created that's, you know, the slides I went through about the different considerations. I have an infographic on that's on display at the seed library locations, and it's on the website. I've done workshops where a lot of the same content has been presented. I've gone to farmers markets and talked to people about natives. A lot of people don't really understand, like I get things like, oh, well, these other plants grow here, so what gives, you know, what's the problem? And so getting into some of these different reasons to grow natives and trying to find what will resonate with whoever I'm talking to, you know, because there's a lot of different, you know, reasons to grow natives, but some may resonate more than others with folks.
And just to let you know, I just dropped in, this is Rebecca, I just dropped in the chat that the Seed Library organization has a whole page on natives with some organizational materials. So that's another place where people can get some questions answered too.
Thank you.
Okay, and then there's been a few questions about propagation and how you source your seeds, and I believe you're going to be speaking to that. So we'll hold off and just keep note of those questions and make sure if they don't get answered, we'll ask them during our next question break. So you're ready to move forward.
That's a great segue, actually. So let's see what we have. So I'm going to talk about, you know, what inspired me, which you probably can imagine because we kind of talked about that a little bit. What inspired starting the seed library, what planning and preparation went into it, how I've obtained and processed the seed, and then some other elements of the seed library beyond seed distribution, and then what we've accomplished so far. So these inspirations, I think I've touched on most of these already. And so a lot of the things that were inspiring me were things that were not necessarily positive. Concerns I had, you know, this idea of increasing threats to wildlands. In fact, just in the year since I've established the seed library, some of my seed collecting sites have been destroyed by fire. So, you know, it's been a very big concern of mine that I'm thinking, okay, we're losing wildlands. We've got to grow more of this at home. And at the same time, I'm seeing more and more recognizing that a lot of home landscapes in my region are what I call inert. So meaning that they may only have a small smattering of species of plants, and those plants are either not native or have very little wildlife value, so that when I walk around or bicycle around my neighborhood, I don't see any butterflies or bees or birds visiting my neighbors' yards. So this has been a concern because, you know, there's just not a lot of valuable plants in the home landscapes. And then at the same time, so many of these plants are not commercially available, but they're native to here. And that's an example. There's a desert chia. It's an edible chia seeds, you know, producing plant. It's native to Maricopa County, right where we are, but it's not something you can buy at nurseries. So that was another concern I had. And that was part of the reason why so many of the home landscapes are inert, is because people can't get a lot of these plants. And then of course there's the education piece too. And then with Doug Tallamy, especially his Nature's Best Hope book, which I think I have in my reference list at the end of the PowerPoint, and that will be loaded up for everybody to have after the summit. His idea is that he's saying, and I think I've kind of touched on it a few places already before, but that habitat is so fragmented and so degraded that we can't count on our wildlands anymore to support wildlife, that we need to support it within the places we live too. Our urban, rural, and suburban areas need to support wildlife. And his idea is that over time, through everyone developing some native landscaping at home, it's like an interconnected new national park of all our habitat connected, kind of a beautiful idea. And so these are the things that inspired me to get started. Was exactly this. Let me get the seed available to people, and let me try to give them the know-how to start from seed. And of course, that always, you know, was something I worried about as well. A lot of people may not want to start from seed, but I still have some content and things that help support them. Profiles of plants, and some of the palettes of plants I've developed, plant lists and things like that. You don't have to start from seed. Some of them are available at the nursery, so I have also tried to address that. And I started this as a sabbatical project in August as a faculty member. And so I've been able to devote myself full time to this endeavor since August. So that's a little bit of background. And so my planning stage, actually, it started at the end of, I think it was 2018, where I started planning this, because the sabbatical project takes quite a bit of lead time and all the application steps and things like that, and developing the idea. So, and actually learning about the native plants in my region probably started at least 10 years ago when I started gardening and learning about the plants. So there was sort of the initial stage of, well, I've just moved to Arizona and learning about plants, and then going deeper and deeper with trying to learn plants through the iNaturalist app and things like that, going to workshops. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to learn the native plants, and there's still a lot I don't know. There's many more than I've learned. But that was kind of a big step. And then as I started thinking about, well, there's no way I can obviously include every native plant in the seed library. What am I going to do as far as making choices? You know, so I came up with these 4 criteria. And so I said, well, I want to make sure I'm supporting wildlife, specifically pollinators. So they should have high wildlife value. They should be either a plant that's a nectar and pollen source, or a larval host plant for butterflies or moths, or provide seed for birds, or cover, or some other value, you know. And that was an important criteria. And then also I wanted to focus on plants that are not commercially available, to get them available in the community. And also I felt there'd be more of an incentive for folks to grow from seed if it wasn't something they could just go and grab at the nursery. So that was another one. And then I mentioned the xeric and heat tolerant. Xeric is dry or heat tolerant, those conditions, because I'm of course anticipating that to increase by a great degree here in the valley, in the Valley of the Sun, we're called, Maricopa County and Sonoran Desert, because of climate change. So I wanted to really focus on that. And then also because of the barrier, you know, of folks asking folks to grow from seed, I wanted to make sure that not everything was easy to grow from seed, but I included a good mix of easy to grow from seed plants. And I did quite a bit of germination experiments as part of this, and researching the literature, but it's pretty thin, and doing some experiments. So that was sort of the thinking that went into it. And I developed a target list of maybe 70 or 80 plants. And so far I've been able to bring in maybe 45 into the seed library over the course of the year. And not every plant has all 4 criteria. It just means that those are the criteria I was really looking at, you know, and if it had all 4 of those criteria, gotta have it. Absolutely have to have that plant. But if it had a few of those, you know, and there were choices and trade-offs, you know, there's some that I included that aren't easy to grow from seed. There are some that are not xeric, or not on the high end of xeric. All of them are have some level of being drought and heat tolerant because they're native to here. But as far as the degree within, and I have a few that are commercially available. So I've made a lot of choices based on a lot of variables. But in general, I have I think I only have 1 tree right now. Quite a handful of shrubs and subshrubs, vines, ground covers. What's the other one I'm missing? Grasses, perennials. And there are some food plants in the seed library as well, you know, your more basic food plants, but those I got from donation. So as far as some of the content I developed, because again, this was really an educational project too, is making sure that I could help overcome any barrier that I could help remove. And so on the seed packets, which you can see here on the bottom, the labels for the seed packets include a variety of information about the plant. What type of plant is it? What's the difficulty level when growing from seed? Its size, what color are the flowers? When are they expected to bloom? How to care for them, just basic stuff. Wildlife value, any cautions, like if they're poisonous. And then a tiny URL that links back to a plant profile that I'll show in a moment, which is a bigger rendition, I guess, of information about the plant. And then what's above here is these are just little, what do you want to call it? They separate the seeds when they sit in the seed box on display so that people can thumb through, and it just gives you, the name and some basic stuff like Parry's penstemon. There's a picture of a bee and a bird. It's a bee and bird supporting plant, for example. So I'll show you the plant profile, an example of one in a moment. And then I used LibGuides to develop the website. And then I have a social media presence, which has turned out to be a pretty powerful way to market. And the seed library is at 3 of our sister colleges in the Maricopa Community College District, where folks can get seeds. One is doing curbside because of the pandemic, and 2 of them have the seeds out in a location kind of like in their entryway to kind of limit people coming all the way into the library, but they've made it available to the public. So let's look at a plant profile. This is an example of, so all these plant profiles are on the website of the seed library, and they're organized by type of plant. So this is a perennial. So this would be in my perennial category, and New Mexico thistle. So I really just wanted to let people know, okay, what is the scientific name? What are the common names? What's the name in Spanish if it's available? Pictures of the plant. What I call kind of an advertisement for the plant in italics. It's kind of, why should I grow this plant? Trying to capture something unique about it. And then all the characteristics I talked about with the label, but maybe a little more extended definitions because I had more space. And then how it might be used in a landscape. So, and any references I had. So that's kind of the educational material that I developed for each of the plants so that people could have that. And again, the plant packet label has a tiny URL that links right back to this information sheet. Okay, so obtaining and processing seed. Obviously I really like thistle because I'm showing it again. It's been a really important plant in the seed library. It's a really great nectar plant. And I'll talk about ways that you can go about doing this. It doesn't have to be so extensive as what I've done, because remember, I had a year full time to engage in this. So, and of course I have a lot of interest in it, you know, passion for it. So there's a lot here that doesn't necessarily have to be done when you're trying to add some natives in. But what I did was I've done the majority of the seed collecting myself personally, which I think is kind of unique for seed libraries or unusual. I've obtained permits on the Tonto National Forest to collect seed. And I've also collected, because our campus has such an amazing space, a pollinator garden space with so many species. And lots of individuals too, pretty good populations of some of these plants. I've been able to collect on campus and at home, where I've also have a lot of these same plants. And that's been really great because with the ongoing drought, there's been very little blooming and seed setting going on lately on the Tonto. In fact, this spring, I don't know how much I'll be able to collect compared to last spring. And I've been getting some donations from folks that I've already known that were in my network that said, hey, I have, you know, blah, blah, blah. Would you like it? You know, and I've been able to get donations that way. And now I'm starting to pick up the pace on that and advertise that a little more. And I'll probably create some guidelines and things like that and educational material for people who want to donate and have these in their yard. But I really just have to verify, you know, what's coming in and making sure it is what it is, and so on and so forth. But that's the way I've obtained the seed. And then I've done the seed processing, packaging and storage as part of my project. I've learned a lot of the techniques, you know, some of these things such as winnowing and threshing, all by hand, you know, pretty much, you know, screens and things are the basic seed equipment I've used. I don't have any, you know, machines that clean seed like seed companies do. And then with packaging, I've used paper instead of plastic because that's going to be less likely to have mold conditions and things like that. And I've also struggled a bit with determining the number of seeds per package. Kind of gone back and forth about this a little bit. And I've kind of landed on, you know, obviously I can't supply as much seed as a seed company can supply, but I want to supply enough for people to get started. And so I've kind of tried to land on, you know, Seed Savers Exchange that I'm a part of has a guideline for their exchange of people exchanging enough seed that it's what they call a sample packet or something. And so that number has been about 25 seeds. So I've been trying to hit that target, but my packages are small. So if they're large seeds, like some of the beans in the food plant category, I couldn't include that many. Or if I had maybe more limited stock, there were some I had to not provide quite that many, but especially for those I have enough of, I've been trying to hit that number. And of course, you know, there's a lot more that could go into that, but there's been a lot of other pieces and parts, so that may get refined further later on. There's some other parts of the project that I've been doing as well. In the first semester, I was doing home consultations where I was going out, either virtually or by going out under social distancing to people's homes for free and consulting with them on how they could increase natives, making specific, producing a report at the end of it with specific recommendations and then giving them seed as well. That was pretty popular and pretty time consuming, and it was impacting other parts of the sabbatical. So after the first semester, I had to stop doing that, but it was a pretty cool way to start out. It'd be great to do more of that in the future, and that might be a possibility with the interns for us to do more of that. I've done workshops, all free workshops on native plant gardening, pollinator gardening, growing plants from seed, and developed some plant palettes that are specific to our county, both for nectar plants and larval host plants for butterflies. And I've been really fortunate to be able to take advantage of gardens that already existed at 2 of our campuses. One out in Mesa Community College, and then the bottom picture is at Scottsdale Community College. These are places where I've been able to add more plants in. I've added 30 plants into the Red Mountain campus at Mesa that are have ethnobotanical uses, and then of course most of them are also have pollinator value as well, or other wildlife value. And then at SEC, I've added a few plants there as well that I've grown from seed, and a few we were able to purchase. And that's just a tiny slice of a very large habitat they have there. And the purpose of these gardens is going to be twofold, really educational, so folks can come in and see the plants in the seed library up close, so that they can then walk over to the seed library and obtain seeds for things that they want to grow. And then also as a seed source itself, to have more of a seed source in various locations. And I have a third partner at Phoenix College where we're starting to add some plants there as well. So over time, we want to have lots of populations to collect from. And also there's a grant that we've applied for interns, to have a couple of interns that we train to do a lot of the things I've been doing as part of the sabbatical this year, and have that kind of help us sustain and continue the seed library on while educating students. I think this is really an exciting part of this that I'm looking forward to. And then other curricular connections as far as service learning. I've done some workshops with those folks, and they're interested in doing things that support pollinators as well. So kind of building out some of those connections. So since we started in August, we've given out over 2,800 seed packets, which blows my mind. I don't know how this happened. I don't know how I managed to get this much seed and package it, or that there'd be that many people interested. I did a temporary mail order from December that just ended actually yesterday, and about 1,000 of the seeds went out that way. But that's not something sustainable. That was really just to kind of get us through a portion of the pandemic when I was able to devote the time to it. But then the other seed packets have gone out through the seed library locations that I mentioned, Gateway Community College, Phoenix College, and Red Mountain Mesa Community College, as well as some farmers markets that I went to, and also the consultations that I was at. As I mentioned, there have been a variety of workshops. I've been really surprised at the number of hits to the website and the number of followers on social media. Way more than I thought. I thought this was going to be a very niche thing, but it's turning out to be more people interested than I really expected. And I've been having a lot of organizations reach out to partner, the Audubon Society, the Tonto National Forest. We're looking at some projects with these interns we're hoping to be able to hire, seed collecting with them. So there's been a lot of interest and media interest, and it started almost immediately when I opened the first location. The New Times got wind of it and wrote an article, and then that led to a snowball effect of media coverage. And so I had no idea that I had never expected there to be much in the way of media other than maybe a press release, and I didn't think any of this was going to come about. And so the reason I bring any of this up is just to say that I think that we've uncovered this unmet need in Maricopa County for native seed. And so I guess I'm posing the question to you that there may be a similar need in your community that you can fill, and just to kind of prompt and inspire you there. And now we're coming into the second round of questions, but I do want to say that the third segment is going to be specifically about how you can set up. This was just my example of how I set up the seed library, but I'm going to be covering in a lot of detail, or as much as I can in the time allotted, how you can set up something, a native seed library, or as native seeds to your collection. So some of those questions may be answered in the next segment as well, but let's go ahead and see what are folks thinking about.
All right, yes, we've had several questions and comments come in, and I believe you probably have answered those previous questions about propagation and how you get these out to the community and how you collect them. But if anyone still has any lingering questions, please enter those in the chat so we make sure everyone has the answers that they need. But a question from Elizabeth asked if you could talk more in detail about the Seed Library social media presence. She asked, what social media platforms do you use and in what ways? And I did enter into the chat your Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter links. So you can talk more about your social media and how it works for you.
Yeah, I found that Facebook and Instagram are my most, I have the most traffic there. The Twitter one hasn't been very fruitful, but I've kept it going. Instagram, I've had a lot of, I think I have more followers on Instagram than on Facebook. Yeah, that's correct. And about almost double. With Instagram, it's been a good place to just promote things. Unfortunately, with everything else going on with the project, I haven't been able to do as many postings as I'd like. I'd like to do more educational postings, like featured plants, or, highlighting a certain plant, or, really doing more educational, but it's been more awareness of things like, promoting the workshops and things like that. So that could be another avenue for an intern as well, to focus on some of that component, because the project is much bigger than a full-time job. I usually am working on something seed library 7 days a week, and I love doing it, so it doesn't seem like work, but there's been a lot of things I haven't been able to do and really develop the social media. I haven't posted nearly as much as I'd like to, but it has helped getting the word out, and I've had a lot of people write me from social media, and it's led to different, things like folks offering to donate seed, or there's been a lot of questions too. Folks ask questions about native plants. And the Facebook one has been good too. There's actually some groups, and you could look for groups in your area. There's a pollinator gardening Facebook group that's for the desert Southwest, or really just the Southwest, I suppose. There might be similar groups that are in your region that you could join and be a part of. And those have been really great, not only at promoting, like reposting things I've put up, but also, just as interested parties. Trying to think if there's anything else about social media I wanted to say. I think that's kind of the gist of it.
Okay, so it sounds like even if someone doesn't have much time to devote to it, having at least some presence is better than none. It at least helps get at least a general word out, if nothing else.
I think so. Yeah, that's been the case for me. Mm-hmm.
All right, next question. Do you save seeds that need stratification, such as milkweed?
Yes, and if I know the germination requirement, I have put that in the seed, in the profiles and the packet labels. There are quite a few. There's also natural stratification. So when I know that a plant needs stratification, I will indicate on the packet to plant it in fall, so it can go through, natural stratification in the ground. So yeah, I have collected ones that require stratification.
Okay, and then also on your seed packets, you give the instructions about what someone would need to do to grow that. So there's some guidance that's given from you. All right, and a couple comments. Just one in general, that someone thinks that your work is amazing. Another amazing comment from someone else also asked or just mentioned, thanks for the CC licensing that they will share here. So, and anything you want to say about that?
Oh yeah, so right, so my like my plant palettes and other content, it's all Creative Commons licensed. So I don't know what else, it's just something that a lot of librarians and others do. I just want to make it widely available to folks.
Okay. And then I did pose your question in the chat on this page. If anyone feels that there's also an unmet need regarding native seed in their community, and Yvette said that she does think that there would be interest in natives, especially with pollinator relationships. And Lisa says, we're thinking of focusing on food seeds, but I think the native seed might really go well with that. So a few people are seeing that it could be beneficial in their area as well. And those are all the questions that we have right now.
Okay, I'll go into the next step here, because this is probably, the one that'll be the most relevant as far as, starting out. And so I'm going to talk about how can you research local natives in your area and decide on what your target species may be, making decisions about your informational materials, how to obtain and process and package seeds. Because of time constraints, I won't have time to get into other aspects of starting a seed library. So if you're starting one from scratch, some of the other things you'll have to consider about your displays or your inventory or checkout limits and all those sorts of things. The Seed Library Association has really good information about those type of things. So I won't have a chance to get into that too much just because we're a little short on time, and some of these other pieces are more specific to incorporating native plants. So I have, and you'll have a PDF of the PowerPoint where you can, the links will be clickable. I offer up about 4 different potential sources where you can learn about native plants that are in your region. So the SignNet Regional Network, when you visit that page, there are a variety of these networks that are regional to different parts of, I believe there's quite a few in the United States, and I saw that there were 2 that included Mexico. I didn't see any for Canada, but there are native plant societies in Canada, so that could be another source. But the SignNet, it has, it's a network of herbariums, so they have a lot of data about plants. It's really botanically driven, you know, it's botanists are driving this. In the one that I use for our region, it has a lot of plant information, specimens, you know, pictures of plants, maps of where they've been found, and all sorts of, you know, content about individual plants. And even floras. So like I can go and I can get a list of Maricopa County native plants from my SignNet site. I was looking around and the amount of content may vary. Like I was looking at one that was for the Southeast, I believe, and it had North Carolina, but they only had native plants down to the level of the state. So the amount of content may vary based on which regional network you're in, but it's a really good starting point no matter what. And then also the Audubon Society has the webpage that'll be linked there. Go straight to a website where you can put in your zip code and it'll recommend plants, mostly plants that support birds, but which are pollinators. Many birds are pollinators, but also other wildlife as well, to a lesser degree probably. But the Xerxes Society, they're about invertebrate conservation. So they're the link there goes to regional guides for pollinators, for plants for pollinators. So these are really great in terms of providing a lot of background information and then specific plants. The only thing I found about those is the regions are broad, so some of it doesn't always apply. For example, the one that's for my region encompasses not only the low desert elevation, but higher elevations. And so some of the plants they list were not relevant to us specifically. So there might be some, you know, kind of filtering through those, but they're really great documents. The same thing with Pollinator Partnership has similar guides as well, focused on pollinator plants. And then your local Native Plant Society, I can't speak enough about those. The link goes to a directory of native plant societies in North America. And if your state or region has a native plant society, not only will they probably have a lot of good content on their page, but they're a source of really great information and help. And I'll talk more about that in a couple of slides as well. So those are some places to get started. You could also look on iNaturalist, but there's no guarantee everything will be native because people may be documenting invasives or introduced. But I think that it'll link to information. If you look at observations on there, it'll link to information about that plant, and then you can discover, you know, what its background is. So as far as criteria for including species, I guess I would say if you're thinking about including native plants in a seed library, you know, start small. You don't have to have, you know, 50 plants like I've got going, because I've had the time, you know, to really devote to this. You could start with just even a handful, you know, 5 species that are maybe high wildlife value or and easy to obtain, or, you know, something along those lines. So you have to think about what criteria are important to you. You know, is it, you know, plants that are pollinator plants? Is it plants that support other wildlife? Is it, you know, folks asked about climate change and adaptation. Is it thinking about some of those considerations? Is it thinking about what's going to be the easiest really to obtain or easiest to grow? I mean, there's so many various criteria that you can consider, and those are just some on tap. So think about that. And then as part of developing those criteria, that's where you can tap into your community of experts. I've had so many people help me along the way from so many different organizations. For example, botanical gardens, botanists that might be in local higher education institutions in your area. You might have groups that focus on plant restoration or ecosystem restoration. So finding out, starting to do some Google searching and finding out what are the various organizations involved in plant conservation and conservation in general in my area, and how can I, reach out to them and get them involved, because they'll probably be pretty excited to be a part of a project that involves getting native plants out to people. Informational materials. You want to think about, what type of material am I going to provide and in what format? And so just some bullet points there on some things that might be helpful if you can provide it. Because a lot of people feel pretty intimidated by germinating from seed. So if you can provide some information about what that plant's needs are, if it's known to be helpful. Wildlife value is great because people can target their efforts, to certain types of plants, depending on what they're trying to do in their yard. The growing, or what's called the cultural requirements, what kind of light, water, does that plant need? And then also, if you have any information about when it should be sown, a sowing season would be good too. So those are some things you could consider. You could follow a format, like I did, or come up with something more creative, or whatever works for you. But thinking about, having some information, at least some baseline information, to help people to get started. Some of the questions I've come up a lot, these two things have come up a lot, is people want to know what's easy to grow. And sometimes they just mean easy to grow in general. And sometimes they mean like easy to start from seed. So having some of those answers on hand is always really good. And, I've put together a list of easy to grow plants that are in the seed library for people to get started. And then also a lot of people ask about which of the plants can be grown in containers. So having some good ideas, answers of your offerings, which ones can grow well in containers, is really another good piece of information to have. And then try to be really mindful about cautions, because a lot of seed or plants do have are poisonous, or have various chemical properties that people should know about. So I think that's important to warn people about that on labels and things like that. So that's just some thoughts about the information materials. Now, as far as obtaining the seeds, this will be maybe the most challenging piece, but I have 3 possible ideas or ways to go about getting seed. And the first one would be tapping into that same local community of experts I mentioned. You might be able to get volunteers to collect seed. It might become a project of maybe a local native plant society. Some of its members would love to go out and collect seed. Botanical gardens may also be interested in partnering with you. They may have a volunteer base, garden clubs, other environmental organizations, maybe like Sierra Club or others in your area. Any local higher education institutions, they may have like service learning projects or other ways that students might want to get involved in this, no matter what level they're at. And then various government agencies as well. Along the way, all of these types of organizations have helped me in my project in different ways. And so you might be able to muster up some volunteers who may already have some plant knowledge or would be willing to learn to actually do the collecting for you. If you're talking about collecting in various places in your area, I would just say to please be sure that you're following all the rules for collecting seed on public lands. That typically requires permits. National forest, places like that require permitting. If you're talking about private land, you're talking about getting permission from the landowner. So I really encourage people to make sure they're following all those things to the letter, because you don't want to jeopardize your project. And also making sure the seed is ethically collected, which is that we're not over harvesting seed. And some of the links here go to a protocol from the Bureau of Land Management and Center for Plant Conservation about this. And it boils down to 2 main things, making sure there's a large enough population that you're collecting from so that you're not threatening that population by collecting from it. And then once you're collecting, making sure you're not taking too much seed so that those plants can continue to replicate in their environment as well. Various guidelines. I think Center for Plant Conservation, I think the guideline there is maybe not taking more than 10% of seed available at a given time. And I think the SOS may be 20%. And then my permit on the Tonto National Forest is 20%. And I believe if there's species that are more rare, they may impose a stricter limit. But that's just some guidelines just to be thinking about these pieces, because they're so important. And then, of course, besides actually going out and doing some collecting, recruiting gardeners that may already have some of these plants could be another great source, especially if you can verify for sure what's coming in. And then, and this is something I haven't really done much of, I have approached seed companies to get donations for food plants, and I've gotten some really great donations, like from Baker Creek and actually in the Seed Savers Exchange, and even some private local folks that donated food plants. I haven't really done this with trying to get native seed as a donation, but that could be an option, especially if you're strapped for volunteers or time. I should probably put together a list of some companies that do offer true native seed. That's probably something on my to-do list later, but there are some companies that actually I've seen quite a few that focus on the plains and wildflowers from the prairies and things like that. That's been kind of an, because I've actually, I should maybe for the sake of full disclosure, I do have a couple of plants that I have that are not true Sonoran Desert natives, but they're North American natives that do well here and are not invasive. And that would be kind of like a blanket flowers. Some of the cone flowers I'm going to bring into the seed library, haven't done it yet. And those sort of plants are available. You know, there's some seed companies that have those, and there are others. So you could try to see if you can find native seed companies for your region, and they might be willing to offer donations. So those are just some ideas for how you can go about obtaining seed. And again, you can stick with a small amount. Oh, wow. I just realized the time. I didn't realize it. I got so close to the end. Let's see. I guess I'll just say, as far as processing, these slides will be available to you, so I won't spend a lot of time on that, but there's a lot of ideas for getting volunteers involved in processing, and a lot of it you can do without fancy equipment or anything like that, and processing the seed to a level that's at least recognizable without having to do intense cleaning. And then I just want to encourage you to start slow with the few high value natives. Keep growing your partnerships and know that you are making a really valuable contribution. So I know I just wanted to wrap up because I saw the time got away from me there. And to see if there's any other questions. You can always follow up with me later on for questions as well too.
Yes, there's a few questions, so we'll jump into those. One just came in. Can you talk about local provenance versus seed houses in other areas?
Yeah, so see, that's another thing. I did want my seeds to be locally sourced, so that's why I did the collection here, including the few North American natives I've included. They are being collected here locally. So that would be another thing to think about is, you know, that goes back to your criteria and your values. Do you want it all to be locally sourced? Does that matter to you or not? I mean, there is a value in that, but there may be things you can't get another way. And actually, I should say that some of my plants in my own garden, I had to source them from Tucson, which is in another county 2 hours south of here, to even get them going. They're native to there and here, but I couldn't get a source of some of these plants here. So there could be obstacles to trying to only locally source, depending on your conditions.
Okay, great. And then a question from Joyce that maybe everyone can relate to is, I'm having trouble getting people interested in coming to our seed library. Do you have any tips for motivation?
I don't know. I mean, the pandemic, you know, I've only done this during the pandemic, so I don't know what it's going to be like beyond that as far as bringing people in. I think a lot of people were using our mail order because it was so convenient, and now they'll have to go to the physical seed library. So I haven't really tackled that yet. I really think been taking advantage of people who are coming into the library for other things, and then they see the seed library, I think is what it's been. So I don't have a lot to offer on that yet.
Okay, great. I think just the way that you diversified during the pandemic was a great way to bring, you know, you went to farmers markets, you had the mail order, you created the social media presence. I think all those things help, you know, and even if you scale back to just being at libraries, you got those people hooked. And so they'll probably keep coming even after that. All right, another question. This is more of a personal question about someone's, you know, own yard. If I already have perennials in my garden that are pollinator attractors, is it okay to leave those and plant natives around them?
So you're talking about maybe non-natives that
I'm
you
thinking
have?
that they mean, not native to their area, perennials,
Yeah.
but they look like they're having wildlife value.
Yeah, I would leave them. I mean, you don't have to have 100% natives in your yard. You can have some non-natives and then just start adding natives in.
Okay. And another question, do you document the pollinators that come to the plants that are grown locally from your seeds?
I've been trying to, when I can get pictures of them. Some of them move so fast, especially some of the bees. I've been having trouble trying to get photographs, but I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to get a handle on what do I have in my yard as far as native bees in particular, because we have a lot of species here in the Southwest, and they're, I want to make sure that I'm providing habitat for them. So yes, that's a goal of mine to do that.
Okay, and then there's many thanks and praise in the chat. A few people also gave their comments on how they've grown interest in their seed library. So everyone can read that to learn from everyone else. And I believe that was all the questions. If I happen to miss one, please re-enter your question in the chat.
And like I said, the PowerPoint will be available with clickable links to all the sites I was talking about and references as well.
Okay, and we put in the chat, there is a survey that we're asking everyone to take regarding the sessions that they attend. So complete the survey for each session. The link is in the chat, so please just take a couple moments to fill that out and provide feedback about your experience here today.
Great. And we also want to encourage people tonight. There is what's actually all weekend. There is a special screening of the Vandana Shiva, the Seeds of Vandana Shiva documentary. So there's a link in the chat about that. It's $10. And these are people that are amazing documentarians that have been following Vandana Shiva for 7 years. And these are definite friends of the seed library. So we're super excited. We also have an online forum. You can see that in the chat. Called Upbeat, and you can also subscribe specifically to the, like a native seeds hashtag if you're specifically interested in just following that thread. So we want to thank Danielle and Lisa for this amazing presentation. And once again, you'll be getting links to the recording as well as the slideshow later. So thank you so much for joining us. And the next session is in 30 minutes. You can find that information in the schedule. I'm going to stop the recording at this point.